Well, thank you all for joining us this evening to learn about the upcoming updates for the fraternity's individual discipline policy set to be implemented on July 1st of 2023. My name is Stephen Domney and I serve as chair of the National Standards Committee. And we will talk a little bit more. So this implementation will occur just in time for the 2022-2023 for the 2023-2024 academic year. And so we're recording this session and have enabled the closed captioning on the Zoom. The closed captioning can be individually turned off based on your menu bar. So please know that. Yes, welcome to my sidekick, Eloise the Corgi. She'll be joining tonight as well. This implementation has been a labor of love over the last 2 years. And we wanted to thank you, the Theta Pi chapter of Bowling Green State University in Ohio, for kicking off the process for us, the IDP task force, and the chair current East Central RVP James Koo for working diligently to have an updated policy presented and passed by the board of directors in August of 2021. And now the National Standards Committee for their work in developing a rollout plan, resources, and tools as we get ready to launch. Tonight's team of National Committee members are Adam Kavanaugh, representing the Northeastern Province, Emily Kendall of the Southern Province, Chris McDaniel from the South Central Province, J.R. Olson from the North Central Province, and then Henner Weber from the Western Province. So now I'm going to kick it over to Chris to tell us a little bit more.
Thanks, Stephen. So while there are a variety of updates you'll notice as we walk through the flow chart in just a little bit, these are the pieces that were highlighted throughout the focus groups. No longer will there be two separate processes that are dependent on the charge. All allegations will follow through the same process. With this update, it will also scale down what was a chapter trial process to 3 members. This is expected to lead to minimum bias when determining the responsibility level of an individual. It will minimize the cluster voting of friends of the accused to find them not guilty where there may be an obvious violation. Under the current policy, the accused would blindly receive a notification of charges with minimal information and delivered mostly via email without the opportunity to hear the information from a human until a trial. Under the updated process, it is required for a chancellor to meet with an individual who has been charged with violating the fraternity ritual, bylaws, or policy and procedures. The respondent would receive all of the allegations and will have the opportunity to accept responsibility for all, some, or none of the allegations. As we walk through the flow in a little bit, we'll discuss what happens in these scenarios. Lastly, to move away from a court of law feel and to build in a restorative justice practice, similar to what students would be used to through their institutional conduct system, terminology has been changed throughout. What we want chapters to consider is not trialing out individuals who may not see value in their continued involvement or may have made poor decisions, but to recognize the opportunity to provide that value and or to assist the brother in changing their behavior to be a better version of themselves. With 61% of all trials ending in expulsion during the 21-22 academic year, less than 1% of which are from pandemic initiatives, the goal of this approach is to identify ways the fraternity can retain initiated members as well as we have been retaining pledges of late. And with that, I'm going to send it to Adam.
A variety of focus groups with collegiate members, both in person and virtually, as well as those with alumni, were conducted. All of our focus groups were provided with the same handout that was hyperlinked in the invitation you all received for this webinar. We had 30 collegiate chapters represented over the sessions from all across the country. During the focus groups, the committee received feedback primarily supporting the direction of updated policy and processes. During this process, participants were asked the same questions with potential follow-up based on responses. Some of the primary things we learned are: first, members are in favor of the terminology changes and less of the court of law language. The current manual in a step-by-step form is extremely helpful, and there is a desire for additional training. Nearly all participants were in favor of the removal of a full chapter trial for a smaller group. There was some hesitation to no longer have an executive trial committee, however, due to its ease. Through explaining the process, the purpose and the process of the administrative hearing with the chancellor, there was some relief, however. Advisors are thankful for the expectation to be a part of the process at the beginning versus only receiving notification at the end so they can better support their members. Additionally, there was agreement in having an advisor figure present at hearings as a coach, as an asset for both them in learning about the situations, but also to ensure minimal procedural errors occur. This is accomplished through the expectation of being copied on all notifications. It was applauded by all participants. Any allegation that may include sexual harassment, misconduct, and/or assault would no longer have the option to be handled by a collegiate chapter. And with that, I'll send it over to JR.
We wanted to provide a basic overview of how the process will work. First, a member will submit any allegations to the chancellor, who will then review with the entirety of the standards committee to determine its validity. Assuming the allegation is determined to be valid, the chancellor would then notify and schedule an administrative meeting with the respondent. This notification is required to be copied to the chapter's DD, assistant DD, and chapter advisor. This meeting is simply to share allegations and information with the respondent and between just the two. It is an opportunity for the chancellor to adjudicate on their own. It is not an opportunity for the chancellor to adjudicate on its own, nor is it an opportunity for the respondent to plead their case. The respondent has the opportunity to process the information and decide if they are going to accept the responsibility for all, some, or none of the allegations against them. Should the respondent accept the responsibility for all the allegations, the full standards committee then will have the authority to determine any outcomes, formerly known as penalties, and any behavior correcting measures. Should the respondent not accept responsibility for some, none, or none of the allegations, the process would then move towards a hearing. During the administrative hearing, the chancellor and respondent can discuss availability with the understanding any scheduling discussed is not binding. And now it's on to Chris.
Should a hearing need to be conducted, the chancellor and the standards committee can and should take into consideration any dates and times discussed with the respondent when scheduling the hearing. The hearing shall be conducted by a hearing of panel of 3, the chapter's chancellor plus 2 additional members of the standards committee who have completed the training modules. The IDP guide will provide a full outline and script for chapters to utilize throughout the process. The guide will outline a hearing to be conducted, starting with presenting information from both sides, a presentation of the witnesses by both sides, and final statements also from both sides. Throughout the conversations, the accused and respondent would have the ability to ask clarifying questions through the chancellor during the hearing, as does the hearing panel. All members of the hearing panel would then discuss the information they have heard to determine a hearing outcome, whether the respondent is responsible or not responsible to have violated the ritual, bylaws, or policy and procedures. If the hearing panel determines the respondent is not responsible, there are no behavioral corrective measures. If the hearing panel determines the respondent is responsible, they would then determine any appropriate behavior correcting measures. During a hearing process, an advisor is required to be present to coach the hearing panel through the process. The advisor can be a district director, chapter advisor, or someone agreed upon between the chapter and the district director. They should be knowledgeable of the process, and their role is simply to coach. It is up to the hearing panel to determine the responsibility or not of an individual, as well as the behavioral correcting measures. The advisor can provide the hearing panel with some recommendations of resources that may be available when determining behavioral corrective measures. Adam?
As we look to the appeals process, the updated process, there's only one appeal level, as demonstrated by this slide. Respondents will no longer have the ability to appeal to a chapter, provincial, and national board if they disagree with the trial outcome. Both a respondent and complainant do have the ability to appeal the decision of a hearing panel or standards committee. That appeal would be reviewed by the National Standards Committee. There are specific grounds on an individual would be permitted to appeal to the National Standards Committee. Number 1, procedural errors. Number 2, new information is available that was not conducted when the hearing was conducted. Number 3, a demonstrable bias was present during the hearing. And number 4, the punishment doesn't fit the crime. Please note, if a respondent does accept responsibility for the alleged violations, the only appeal they will have would be number 4, the punishment not fitting the crime. The National Standards Committee may request information from a hearing panel for their review. When the National Standards Committee renders their decision, there is no further appeal. And back to JR.
Part of the goal with this update was also to speed up resolutions. Under this new policy, discipline of the individual would be fully conducted or concluded by collegiate chapter within 51 days of an allegation received. At the provincial level, it would be 127 days. In both cases, the individual would have 30 days to appeal and the National Standards Committee 60 days to render a decision, making the process a max of 141 days and 217 days respectively. This is an improvement from a max of 480 days of its current executive committee trial was to be appealed all the way through the chapter and provincial levels to the board of directors. And now on to Stephen.
Oh. Didn't mean to turn myself off. So the next piece is talking about the educational experiences. So Stephen and committee, what does it mean for our brothers to understand where we're going? So one of the pieces is there will be a handout with talking points at President's Academy that's coming up in 2023. We will also have educational presentations led by committee members and volunteers at the provincial lead conferences. We will host a webinar following provincial lead conferences to make sure that anyone that was not in attendance would be able to hear the information that was shared. We will be updating the Chancellor Officer module information as needed. We will begin the onboarding training process prior to the implementation on July 1. It is our goal as a committee to ensure that training is well vested and successful, as we do have a July 1 deadline to have that fully implemented, and we would like to have people trained leading into that July 1. We will also be developing a resource manual to support fraternity leaders through this process, down to scripts and other elements to help guide them. Please note that a hearing panel is the Chancellor +2, but the committee itself is the Chancellor +3. And so recognizing that. And then following that, during Grand Chapter Congress next summer in Houston, Texas, we will have another educational session as we will be underway in that process. And then we will also, to help us ensure that successful transition into that either fall semester or fall quarter, depending on the school system, we will have an educational webinar to support that in September, just to make sure that we have all of those pieces set to go and making sure that everyone's well understood and can implement this process effectively. So with all that being said, as it's always said, who has the first question? You're welcome to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Please note that our Staff member extraordinaire Tyler Havens, the Director of Chapter Services, is assisting us tonight and has been a champion through this entire process. So please ask away. We're here to, this is why we're having this webinar, is to make sure we answer questions and find out if there's anything that we need to do to better support you all.
Stephen, the first question here, how are the standards committee members determined on the chapter level? Are they volunteer, or do they volunteer themselves, or are they appointed?
Great question, Megan. I would say that it's up to the chapter how those are selected. Some may volunteer, some may be elected. We are leaving that up to the chapter process. They just need to make sure that they are trained and there's enough to host the committee and enough to have for a hearing.
Can I ask a quick follow-up on that?
Sure.
Would that be something that the chapter would, let me start over. It's been a long day. Is that something the chapter would fold into their policy and procedure in terms of if they elect or appoint those
Yes.
members? Okay.
And we will have templates for the local governing documents around this to help guide them if they need it. But chapters will have that, like I said, chapters will have that option to determine.
Cool, thanks.
All right, Stephen, I've got another question here. With determining validity, who or what is the check and balance in cooperation with the chancellor? So I'm assuming that this is when an allegation gets presented to the chancellor, who then is determining the validity of that allegation?
Great question. I think this is where the advisor needs to assist in some of this conversation to help them. But I'll be honest with you. I think the reality is more times than not, the cases are or have some level of validity. And so I don't want us to get into a process of like creating the brother versus one brother said this, another brother said this, but rather a process that's fair and balanced. And so trying to work through making sure that the once an allegation is received, to also make sure that advisors looped in to be aware so they can help guide through that process. And the advisor could be designated. It could be the chapter advisor. It could be a DD. It could be a trained volunteer or a trained leader, a certified leader. And so recognizing what that may look like to ensure this. I think that's what we would navigate to verify and ensure the validity of this process.
All right, next up.
And Stephen, I think that a lot of it has to do with the collegiates being trained in with the program itself can kind of determine the validity.
Absolutely. You are correct, JR.
All right, next up. How are we going to make sure training is ongoing outside of these modules? Because to be honest and transparent, eBoard just doesn't complete their training modules, so the chapters rely on transitions, ...
That's why we will probably be educating in multiple facets and methods to ensure this. This is only the beginning. This is not like we set it and forget it. This is not shake and bake. This will be a long process of making sure that we continuously are educating, and that also the process will evolve. I think the reality is college students are continuing to evolve, so our process will continue to evolve. And the way that the new IDP is, it allows for that evolution to occur while also not putting us in a situation that would put us in a stretch with an institution or any kind of adversarial relationship. I think this truly does put us as the forefront when it comes to discipline and ensuring the success of not only our collegiate members, but also making sure that we are educating and creating strong community-based leaders, but also ensuring that when we have to do the behavioral correcting actions, that we are helping them be better individuals and not focus on being punitive. But I will say we will continuously have to educate. But I think the reality is you can train, to be honest with you, if the entire chapter wanted to train on this, they could train on it. We're not saying that it has to only be chancellor plus 3 or chancellor plus the 2 for the hearing. Like it, to be honest with you, anyone and everyone could take the training and support them in that process.
Stephen, before we go on to the next question, there was a follow-up to the previous question. Is there a mechanism to bring submit an allegation through this process without it going through the chancellor?
Great question. So we've talked about this, and there is a policy around how that we designate a chair, especially in the event that the chancellor is the individual in question, and so doing our best to ensure that. So although we want it to be the chancellor, in the event that it is in question, it would go to the president. And so just being mindful of how to navigate those things. But I would say, as a volunteer, if you are supporting a chapter, you should be in the know of these things going on. This shouldn't be like the day before the hearing, you're the first time you're hearing about what's actually occurring. I think it's important to know that. And one other thing to make mention of, talking about the ongoing education that we've talked about as a collective committee, is making sure that the committee is actually meeting regularly. I know that our chapters get in the habit of like, we only meet when there's stuff to deal with. The reality is there should be ongoing conversations about are there trends, are there things that are happening, so that they're preparing themselves for how they would navigate this. We heard plenty of times in focus groups of like, well, I've never navigated that scenario before. And so we recognize that we'll have to train on specific topics, but at the same time is like, our membership within each collegiate chapter should know what's going on. And so to navigate that. So again, going back to the follow-up question, yes, if it doesn't go to the chancellor, it must go to the president, but any other way would go to the chancellor. So those are the two mechanisms in which reporting would occur.
Great. Next question is, what happens if a chapter doesn't have an involved chapter advisor or district director? What if other local alumni volunteers are not able or willing to participate?
So as a last resort, it would be working with the staff to figure out what that looks like. But I can assure you, there will be plenty of volunteers that will be working with chapters that can assist and be able to be a part of this journey with a collegiate chapter. We do not want them to be alone in this. I recognize the feeling of peer accountability, and as someone who works on a college campus on a daily basis, the level of peer accountability can sometimes be daunting for students. And so recognizing the fact that they should not be doing this alone. They need the support. And so whether that's a staff member, obviously we want it to be more on the our trained volunteers, but let's figure out a way to work through that and figure out what's best.
All right, next up, at the chapter level, other than the standards committee members, who else should be trained? Should the committee be a year-long assignment, or does the chapter have the option to change every semester?
Chapter has the option on that. Obviously, a best practice would probably just say to have it in a year-long framework, but the reality is every chapter is unique in their own experiences, and so the evolution of what that may look like can be a semester to semester basis. As I indicated earlier, every member of the chapter could go through this training so that you never have not having the ability to have a committee member or a hearing officer or hearing member. And so just recognizing that those trainings are helpful, and it helps to make sure that there's always someone available to that process.
All right. What happens if a chapter doesn't have enough people willing to take the training and or serve on this new committee? Is there a mechanism to have the provincial committee step in? I don't see that anywhere.
So currently, the provincial standards committee will only hear cases that go outside of the scope of policy for the collegiate members to hear. So we're talking hazing, sexual assault, other egregious elements. So just recognizing the fact of, so the reality is we need to be up. I will say this. There is a means in which the Provincial Standards Committee can assist. However, we need to be speaking positively of this process, being able, encouraging, helping them understand that they are a part of creating change within their chapter, and helping elevate to a new level. So I would ask, if we are struggling with that, whose chapter do I need to come visit so I can give them the Stephen Domney, Mr. Rogers Neighborhood speech on why they should be on the help with IDP, because as someone who's been on the task force and now on the standards committee, I think it's important for them to have say and be involved in this process. And so we really want to work to navigate that with them, but also help support them, because this is their journey. This is their voice needs to be heard. They need to be a part of this process. And so just wanting to navigate that. Jen, I saw your hand go up, and I'm not sure if it is in relation to this question. So I'm going to ask. Yeah.
You can come to me last. I'm just driving, so I can't type my question.
Okay, we'll get to you in just a second.
I was going to say, Jen, I was coming to you next. So why don't you go ahead and ask your question since you're still unmuted?
Sure. First off, thank you everyone, because having been on the IDP task force and seeing where it is now, the evolution is wild. We were sitting in the 2020 developing the concept of this, and I'm really impressed on where it is today and what we're going to do with it. I just need a reminder of, today trials are tracked within CMP and the chapter is responsible for reporting it. Are we tracking everything from like the pre-hearing and the hearing, or just hearings in CMP for us in case like there's an appeal and we have to follow up?
So there should be some level of documentation throughout the process. As we've indicated earlier, that we will need, when an appeal comes to be, we may request notes and minutes from the chapter. So it's critical that that is captured on the front end. Just like we may have mentioned, I think, Jen, when you and I were together in the task force framework, the reporting in the hub will still say the same, just the change of terminology. So we will have the means to capture that, but it's important for them to be taking notes and keeping minutes of those meetings just to ensure that we have documentation.
So to back brief that, make sure as volunteer leaders, we are advising the students involved in the hearing process and the chapter standards committee to write down, document everything to begin with, so we don't have a mess later if needed.
Absolutely.
Cool, thank you.
All right, next up. Are there plans to incentivize all chapter members to complete the training via CMP? Via CMP. I cut myself off as I was putting the question out there. I apologize.
So that's a great question. Being real honest, we are still navigating that component. So we will work to, I appreciate that sentiment. So we'll get back to you on that. But recognizing the fact, one thing I will mention that as I pause for a second, is that if the chapter wants to hold their own trials, they have to have trained members, and we will be able to know who are the trained individuals. So procedurally, if they want to not be non-compliant, they would do it without trained people, but that is not the case. We want them to be trained so that there's not an appeal to the National Standards Committee because procedurally they had done something wrong with untrained individuals.
All right, keep questions coming in. I've got one more currently here in the chat. It is a follow-up to something that I had put in there. It was asked in the chat, is there something in policy that has the chancellor kind of as the overseer of the process? And the answer to that question was yes, there is not only changes to the IDP, but there was some additions to the responsibilities of the chancellor that does add that. So the follow-up to that response, and Tim, these are great questions. And what happens if the chancellor refuses that responsibility, as some have refused to take part in current executive committee trials, even if it is listed in their responsibilities? Who's next in line to take the responsibility? What happens if the chancellor is accused of some incident? Let's take these piece by piece, because there's a variety of questions in here. So let's start with Stephen. What happens if the chancellor refuses the responsibility, even if it's listed in their even if it's listed in the policy as their responsibility?
Well, as I indicated earlier, technically it would go to the president. However, let's be real honest here. We might need to have a real conversation with said chancellor about their responsibility to be a part of this role if they are not able to fulfill their duties and responsibilities as the chancellor, as this is written into their responsibilities. So navigating that. And as we all know, collegiate members tend to want to make sure that people are doing what they say they will do, at least try to. So navigating that, I think also having conversations with the president to make sure that they understand that in the event that the chancellor does not take on those responsibilities, that they will have that responsibility added to them. And so this is not a best practice to default to the president in the event the chancellor does not want to do the work. And so the reality is, how do we navigate that to ensure that they are doing what they say they will?
I want, before I move on through the rest of this question, Jen raised her hand. I don't know if it is asking a follow-up to that.
After Tim's question.
Okay, so the next piece of the question is, what happens if the chancellor is the one accused of some incident? Who do they go to?
So if the chancellor is the one accused, then the once they fill out the form, that information is then shared to the president. And so that is who fills into the responsibilities of the chancellor in the event that the chancellor is the one that is accused. The committee will still occur in that framework of having the hearing with the president as chair and then two others.
All right.
Oh, and I misspoke. I apologize for that. I'm like reading multiple things at once. So I'll apologize. To backpedal. President will receive the information, but then the president will appoint a chair. And likely if for the committee for that case, I think the reality is navigating, just making sure that they are a trained individual from the standards committee.
Okay, Stephen, so just to clarify, if it is the chancellor who is the one that has allegations submitted, they get submitted to the president, and then the president then selects somebody from the trained members of the standards committee to serve in the role of chancellor for that particular and only instance.
Yes, that is correct.
Great. So then the last piece of this is, can there be a hearing if there are only 2 instead of 3 people?
That is a great question. So it is supposed to be for a hearing, it is the chancellor +2. The committee, the standards committee, which is different than the hearing committee, the standards committee is the chancellor +3. So recognizing that as long as there are a chancellor +2, the hearing can occur.
Jen, why don't you go ahead?
All right, two-parter. Part one, when will the training for the standards committee be available? And part two, when members take the training, collegiate or alumni, or is it gonna be like CDL where it lapses at a certain point, you have to retake it to keep your, like, I have taken the training standing? Because, like, for example, if you have a two-term chancellor for some reason, that chance we'd assume like, okay, you've taken that training, that carries over 2 terms, or do they need to retake that every time? Or if someone wants to serve on the standards committee for their entire collegiate career, do they need to retake it?
That's a great question. So currently we are navigation for just getting everyone trained. We will as we alluded to earlier, is that there will be ongoing training and evolution of this. So I would say stay tuned for phase 2. Phase 1 is to make sure that everyone is at least on the baseline level. And then as we navigate this, we can see what elements will need to be added or things that could be utilized as a refresher, just to ensure that they don't forget. Or if things have changed from one year to the next or one biennium to another, how do we navigate some things? So.
All right.
And then there's the
Go ahead,
training.
Jen.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, so the training's not available yet.
No, the training is not available. To be honest with you, we're trying to get through lead provincials first. We're already in development. We're in the finalization and recording phase of this process. But recognizing that we are working to get that out as soon as lead provincials provincial lead conferences are over. So
I totally get you. All right, thank you.
All right, Stephen, I have a clarifying question. To be clear, the chancellor determines the validity of claim and also selects the chapter IDP members? Question mark.
So validity, yes. IDP committee members, again, it's up to how the chapter designates them. As far as when it comes to who is the hearing committee or hearing team is based on who is on the committee that is trained. So the reality is everyone that's on the committee. But ultimately the chancellor is more of the like manager and not necessarily the whole. So there is some level of just a reminder that the validity piece. So excuse me, backpedaling for a second. Chancellor receives information. Chancellor is the one that then brings the information to the committee and make sure of that. Then the chancellor schedules the meeting to gather information. So then can move forward with whether to with the hearing process or going to committee. Because again, as the process states in the flow chart. So yes, the committee determines validity. The chancellor is the manager of said process. And there was a second part to that question, Tyler, and I think I already screwed that up too.
The second part of the question was, and also selects the chapter IDP members. And I believe you had mentioned that it was the based on whatever the chapter determines in their governing documents, how those standards committee members would be selected. Is that accurate?
That is correct. Sorry.
All right. I have kind of a question here that is more so to me. Will the slide deck be made available? A variety of you have asked that question. We are recording this and we will make that available. At the lead provincial conferences, there will be additional information in the handouts. One of the questions was specifically about the timeline. The timeline is actually outlined in the policy. So in the National Policies and Procedures Manual, you will see under discipline of the individual, there is yellow highlighted information. That is the policy. That is the policy that is that we're talking about currently tonight. That is not in effect until July 1, 2023. So if you see yellow highlights in the National Policy and Procedures Manual, those are things that have been passed by the Board of Directors, such as these policies, but not yet in effect. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. Are there other questions out there for the Stephen and the Standards Committee? Jen, hands up.
All right, since I sit on my provincial discipline committee, is this the assumption that we need to close all open, like appeals, voluntary withdrawal, all that stuff needs to be done before this new policy turns over?
I think that that's probably a question more for me. So Jen, I'm going to say we always want those to be closed out as quickly as possible. At some point, there is a policy that is going to end those, whether they have actually been completed or not. But so yes, the goal would be that since this takes effect July 1, 2023, I would say about 90%, if not all of our chapters would be out of school by the time that date hits. So I would hope that our leadership teams and provincial discipline committees, et cetera, can get all of those things situated and filed away before students leave for the summer break.
All right, cool, thank you.
Erica, can we get a portion unhighlighted? That I can, but for the what is she pulled it herself. Apologize. But yes, we'll get Tim, I thank you for the direct message. Yeah, we can put that timeline. We'll find a way to get that timeline for rollout more widely available. Other questions? Jen, your hand's back up, or is this a continuing question?
Hand back up. So communication wise, I know probably a ton of stuff has gone out to our collegiates already. We've got President's Academy, got lead. Is there like another major, with officers turning like around this time of year, and then another set of officers turning again, possibly at the end of the spring semester, are we going to get another large communication just so that all officers are fully aware this is happening?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, Steve, I'm going to jump in here real quick from, a staff perspective. For everybody on the call, there really has not been a whole lot of information that went out to collegiates, and that was intentional. They've gotten bullet points at the lead schools, and that is, other than this being available in the National Policies and Procedures Manual, that has been it. And the intentionality behind that is they are still, because this is not in effect yet, we didn't want to give too much information so that they started using it now, because per policy, they are not able to use this process now. We want it because we recognize that there's a variety of turnover from fall to spring. Then that is why there's not a whole lot of extra information out there, other than it being in the manual. We also did those focus groups. So we had about 30 or so chapters that were represented across the country in those focus groups that know a little bit more. But I'm going to let Stephen talk more about what is upcoming in terms of rollout, but wanted to make everybody aware of what we have done on the staff side for rollout at this point.
Absolutely. So again, we will do a webinar post provincial leads. And so then recognizing the fact that there will be communication that will go out as we have training available. We are still navigating with champion chapters, as I will call them, of collegiate chapters that are really helping us champion this. And we're really excited to utilize them and help with this process. And then also recognizing the fact that we will do an update to the Chancellor Officer module to help solidify and clarify information on this. Again, obviously we'll have something at GCC, and then we'll do it again in September, because recognizing the fact that not everyone will be at GCC. So we're doing our best to make sure that we're hitting every angle that we possibly can to show success, show support, and make sure that this is successful. So recognizing that the webinars will go out to all officers, and then recognizing the fact that we'll also go out to all officers for the one in September. So you basically have two major opportunities for them to be involved. Again, this is not, we want to be helpful. The National Standards Committee is willing to help support and figure out how to help navigate education. So if you have suggestions, please share with us any thoughts, because we want to make sure that we are doing this in a holistic manner that is going to make sure that our membership understands that it slightly going to be like a light switch on July 1, and how do we turn the corner on that, to make sure that they're set up for success, but also helping them navigate as they begin the new experience. Yes, Jen, what's
Right. Yep, just a way to round this out. As staff and National Standards Committee, what can we as volunteer leaders do to be most effective to help you all out in terms of like sharing it? Like, clearly it sounds like we don't want to confuse people by sharing the whole like process, but what can we do to help between now and July 1?
I think the biggest thing is to begin sharing the nuggets of information that's out there. Make sure you have the right nuggets of information. This is not attacking anyone. This is me just clarifying that sometimes what is written versus what is shared sometimes gets confusing. And so just making sure that what is actually in documents is what you're sharing out, because we want to make sure that we're consistent in that messaging. But making sure that they understand the pieces that are out there, and then helping them prepare. We're not saying like go get trained tomorrow. What we are saying is like start thinking about like what are the things that you're going to need to know. I think we as the National Standards Committee only know what we know, and the beauty is that the committee currently has half of our team is collegiate members. And so it's been helpful to see through their eyes how we're navigating this, but also seeing through the eyes of the 30 collegiate members, or roughly 30 collegiate members that were involved in focus group conversations, and through their eyes. So just making sure of like, where you ask the questions if they were involved, if they weren't involved, what information are they going to need, so that we can begin that conversation now, so that we're not sitting in October where they're like, well, I heard nothing. And so we want to make sure as more information is out there that we will make sure that that's communicated, and making sure that our leaders know. We will do the best that we can. And we're, to be honest with you, our training is trying to be as digestible as possible. We also know the attention span of collegiate members. I mean, let's be real, of even our volunteers. And so trying to make sure that how we can be succinct and concise, and making sure that we help people understand, but also are effective in our process.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you guys all for the work. Seriously, this has gone so far from where it was as a task force.
And also know that like staff will be working to navigate, notating what leaders can be doing to help as we go through each step of the way. We are not trying to like roll this out all and not have you a part of the journey. So please, if people feel like they're not engaged or not involved, please share this webinar when it's available. Please allow them to ask staff questions. And so just really trying to work through what we can do to support as best as possible.
All right, we are coming up on the bottom of the hour here. Any additional questions that are out there, please feel free to unmute. drop them in the chat if you have. And additionally, Stephen, where can individuals find and reach out to the National Standards Committee as I vamp here for any last second questions?
I guess I should unmute myself. So just so you know, our email address is nationalstandards@dsp.org. Again, nationalstandards@dsp.org. And we're happy to answer any questions that are sent our way. Please note, those emails go directly to me, so I will get to see them. And we will decipher through how either myself, the committee, staff need to navigate any questions that come our way just to best support you in our response.
All right. Well, it looks like people are starting to sign off. So again, if there are questions that you have about process and things like that, please feel free to email the National Standards Committee via Stephen@nationalstandards@dsp.org. We will make this available and get this out to you as soon as we can. And again, thank you all so much for taking the time and your investment in our students in the fraternity and in this process. So again, thank you so much. We appreciate it.